The Valari had watched humanity for a very long time. They watched from their ships, hidden in the darkness between stars. They watched from small machines floating near Earth's moon. They watched and they waited and they wrote their reports. Ambassador Thrall was one of the oldest watchers. Thrall was not like humans. The ambassador had a body made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Thrall had lived for 9,000 years and had seen many species rise and fall across the galaxy. To Thrall, humans were just another young species. Interesting, perhaps, but not important. The reports all said the same things. Humans were soft. Their bodies broke easily. They lived for less than 100 years, which was nothing compared to the Valari. They fought wars against each other. They damaged their own planet. They were emotional and unpredictable. The Valari Collective, the great council that ruled Thrall's people, had decided long ago that humans were not worth their attention. Let them grow or let them die. It did not matter. The universe was vast, and the Valari had existed for millions of years. They would exist for millions more. What were humans to them? Nothing. That was the answer. Humans were nothing. Then the Draken swarm came. The Draken were nightmares given form. Their ships were made of metal and flesh twisted together. They did not want peace. They did not want trade. They wanted only to feed. They moved from world to world, eating everything alive, then moving on to the next meal. And now they were coming for Valari Prime. Captain Park Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Taeguk. It was Earth's first true warship built for travel between stars. The ship was not beautiful. It was gray and functional, built for war rather than wonder. But Do-hyun loved it like a soldier loves his weapon. He was 43 years old. His hair was turning gray at the sides. His face had lines from years of stress and responsibility. He had joined the military when he was 18 because his father had been a soldier, and his grandfather before that. He never imagined he would one day command a ship among the stars. Lieutenant Kim Yuna stood beside him, watching the sensor screens with careful eyes. She was younger than him by 15 years, but she was the best sensor operator in the fleet. Nothing escaped her notice. "Captain," she said. Her voice was calm, but Do-hyun could hear the tension beneath it. "I am detecting fold space signatures. Multiple contacts." The main screen flickered and changed. Do-hyun felt his stomach drop. 300 ships. 300 Draken vessels tearing holes in space as they arrived. Each ship was massive, covered in spines and weapons that looked grown rather than built. They moved like living things, hungry and hunting. "Where are they going?" Do-hyun asked, though he already knew the answer. "Valari Prime," Yuna confirmed. "They will arrive in 6 hours." Do-hyun closed his eyes for a moment. The Valari had never been friendly to humanity. When humans first reached out to them, asking for contact and friendship, the Valari had responded with cold words. "Stay away from our borders. Do not enter our space. You are young and foolish, and we want nothing to do with you." It had hurt. Humanity had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life for centuries. To be rejected so completely had been a blow to their pride. But now the Valari were about to die. Their defense fleet was small. They had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten how to fight. Against 300 Draken warships, they would last perhaps an hour. Then the Draken would land on their world and feed on billions of Valari. Men, women, children. All of them food for monsters. "Sir," Yuna said quietly, "what do we do?" Do-hyun opened his eyes. Behind him, a hologram flickered to life. It was Thrall, the Valari ambassador, watching from their ship far away. "Human captain," Thrall said. The ambassador's voice was like crystal bells ringing. "You should flee. The Draken will not chase you. They care only for our world. Save yourselves." Dahin did not answer right away. He looked around his bridge. He saw his crew, men and women who had families back on Earth. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also waiting for him to tell them what to do. He thought about his daughter, who was 12 years old and loved to paint pictures of stars. He thought about his wife, who always told him to be careful. He thought about Earth, blue and green and beautiful, hanging in the darkness of space. Then he thought about the Valari. Millions of them. Billions of them. People with families of their own. Children who had never hurt anyone. All of them about to die. The Valari had been unkind to humanity. They had called humans young and foolish. They had pushed them away. But did that mean they deserved to die? No, Dahin said out loud. Yuna looked at him. Sir? Dahin stood straighter. He reached for the communication controls and opened a channel to every ship in the human fleet. 20 ships. It was not much against 300, but it was what they had. All ships, he said. His voice was steady and strong. This is Captain Park Do-yoon of the Taeguk. Set course for Valari Prime. Maximum speed. We are going to fight. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Yuna smiled, small but real, and began entering the coordinates. Behind Do-yoon, Threll's hologram flickered with confusion. Why? The ambassador asked. We have given you nothing. We have offered you no alliance. We have not been your friends. Why would you die for us? Do-yoon finally turned to look at the Valari. His eyes were calm and certain. You did not have to give us anything, he said simply. You did not have to be our friends. You are people. That is enough. He turned back to the screen, where the stars stretched out before them. Helm, he ordered. Take us in. The Taeguk jumped forward into the darkness, leading 20 small ships toward 300 monsters. And in that moment, Thrall felt something strange. Something the ancient ambassador had not felt in thousands of years. Curiosity. True curiosity about these strange, soft creatures who rushed toward death, not because they had to, but because they chose to. What kind of species does such a thing? Thrall did not know, but the ambassador was about to find out. Space is silent. There is no air to carry sound. When ships explode, they explode without noise. When weapons fire, they fire in complete quiet. This is what makes space battles so strange. So much death, and not a single scream can be heard. But inside the ships, there was plenty of sound. Lieutenant Commander Cho Mina gripped her flight controls as her small fighter shook from an explosion nearby. Warning lights flashed red across her screen. Her radio was full of voices, some giving orders, some calling for help, some suddenly going silent. She was the leader of Red Crane Squadron. 12 fighters. 12 pilots. Most of them were young, some barely 25 years old. They had trained for years, but training was not the same as real battle. Nothing could prepare you for real battle. Stay together, Mina shouted into her radio. Do not break formation. If you fly alone, you die alone. A Draken interceptor came at her from the left. It was an ugly thing, shaped like a twisted insect with too many wings. Maya pulled her fighter hard to the right and fired. Her weapons hit the interceptor and it exploded into pieces. But there were so many more. The human fleet had arrived at Valari Prime to find the battle already started. The Valari defense ships, beautiful silver vessels shaped like leaves, were being torn apart. They fought bravely, but they were not warriors. They had forgotten how to be warriors. Now the humans were here to remind them. On the bridge of the Taeguk, Captain Park Do-yoon watched the battle unfold on his screen. It was chaos. Ships moving in every direction. Weapons firing constantly. Explosions blooming like flowers made of fire. Target the largest enemy vessel, he ordered. full weapons. The Taiguk fired everything it had. Missiles streaked across space. Energy beams cut through the darkness. They hit the Draken command ship and tore holes in its side. The command ship turned toward them. It was 10 times the size of the Taiguk. Its weapons began to glow. "Brace for impact," Dahyun said calmly. The Draken fired. The Taiguk shook like a toy being thrown by an angry child. Lights flickered. Metal screamed. Somewhere deep in the ship, something exploded. In Section 7, Petty Officer Baek Jisoo was thrown against a wall by the blast. She hit hard and fell to the floor. Her ears rang. Her vision was blurry. But she forced herself to stand. She was part of the damage control team. When things broke, she fixed them. When fires started, she put them out. It was not a glamorous job, but it was important. Without people like her, ships died. There was fire everywhere. Real fire, burning hot and orange, feeding on the air in the corridor. Jisoo grabbed her extinguisher and started spraying. The foam hissed as it covered the flames. "Help me!" The voice came from her left. Jisoo turned and saw Ensign Han Tai-ho trapped under a fallen beam. The beam was metal and heavy, heated red by the fire. Tai-ho was screaming. He was just a kid, maybe 22 years old. He had told Jisoo yesterday that he wanted to be a teacher after his military service ended. Jisoo ran to him. She grabbed the beam and immediately felt the heat burn through her gloves. The pain was incredible, but she did not let go. She pulled with all her strength, her back straining, her muscles screaming. The beam moved. Just a little, but enough. "Crawl out," she yelled. "Now!" Tai-ho dragged himself free. His legs were injured, but he was alive. Jisoo dropped the beam and fell to her knees, breathing hard. Her hands were burned red and black. "Medical team to Section 7, she said into her communicator. Her voice shook, but she controlled it. "One injured. Burns and possible broken legs." She did not mention her own burns. There was no time for that. Back in space, Mina had lost 3 of her pilots. 3 young people with names and faces and families. Lee Sun-ho, who loved old movies. Kang Mi-rae, who could make anyone laugh. Yoon Tae-sung, who sent letters to his mother every week. Gone. Just like that. "Red Crane, pull back to the Taiguk," Mina ordered. Her voice cracked slightly. "Regroup and refuel." As the remaining fighters flew toward the mothership, Mina looked out her window at the battle. Human ships were burning. The Lari ships were dying. But the Draken were taking losses too. More losses than they expected. The monsters had thought this would be easy. They were learning otherwise. On his ship far from the fighting, Ambassador Threll watched everything through sensors and cameras. The ambassador had seen many species fight before. The Korath people fought with cold logic, calculating every move. The Mendari fought because their gods told them to. The Yulith fought because chemicals in their blood made them angry. But humans were different. Thrall watched. Petty Officer Jisoo lift a burning beam to save a stranger. Thrall watched young pilots fly toward certain death without hesitation. Thrall watched Captain Dohyun stand calm and steady while his ship burned around him. These humans were afraid. Thrall could see it. They were terrified. But they fought anyway. They pushed through their fear as if it did not matter. As if something else was more important than survival. What was it? What drove them? Thrall searched ancient memories for an answer and found nothing. In 9,000 years, the ambassador had never seen anything like this. The first wave of the battle ended after 3 hours. The Draken pulled back to regroup. The humans had lost 8 ships out of 20. Hundreds of people dead. The Taiguk was damaged and bleeding air from a dozen holes. But they were still fighting. They were still alive. Captain Dohyun sat in his command chair and looked at the screen. The Draken were not finished. They would attack again soon. And again after that. They would keep coming until someone won and someone lost. Lieutenant Yuna approached him. She had a cut on her forehead, and her uniform was torn, but her eyes were still sharp. "Captain," she said quietly, "we cannot win this. You know that." Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Yes, I know. Then why are we still here?" Do-hyun was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but certain. "Because if we leave, they all die. The Valari. Every single one of them. And I cannot live with that. I will not live with that." Yuna looked at him. Then she nodded once and returned to her station. The second wave would come soon, and they would be ready, or they would die trying. The second wave came, then the third, then the fourth. By the 5th hour of battle, the human fleet was broken. Of the 20 ships that had come to fight, only 12 remained. Some were so damaged they could barely move. Others had lost so many crew that the survivors had to run from station to station, doing the work of 3 people. But they would not retreat. Admiral Shin Yoonji commanded the defense from her flagship, the Mugunghwa. She was 61 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that showed no emotion. She had been a soldier for 40 years. She had seen friends die. She had given orders that sent young people to their deaths. She carried all of those memories inside her like stones in her heart. Now she carried more. Admiral, her tactical officer, said. He was a young man named An Jung-woo, and his hands were shaking. "The Draken are pushing toward the planet, toward the northern continent." Eunji studied the holographic map. She knew what was on the northern continent. The Valari nurseries. Vast crystal chambers where millions of young Valari grew and developed. They were not yet born in the way humans understood birth. They were still forming, still becoming. They were helpless. "How many young are in those nurseries?" Yoonji asked. "Our information says approximately 4 million. 4 million children. 4 million lives that had never done anything wrong. 4 million futures that would be eaten by monsters if she failed." "All ships," Eunji said into her communicator, "form defensive line between enemy fleet and the planet. Priority target is any vessel approaching the northern continent." "Admiral," Jung-woo said carefully, "if we concentrate there, we leave other areas undefended. We might—" "I know what we might lose." Yoonji cut him off. Her voice was cold and hard. "But those are children. We protect the children first. That is not a discussion." Jung-woo swallowed and nodded. "Yes, Admiral." The human ships moved into position. A thin line of metal and courage standing between monsters and innocent lives. The Draken came at them like a wave of hunger on the surface of Valari Prime. The situation was even worse. Sergeant First Class, Oh Jun-ho, crawled through the ruins of what had once been a beautiful Valari city. The buildings had been made of crystal that sang when wind passed through them. Now they were broken and silent, shattered by Draken weapons. Junho was 35 years old. He had grown up poor in a small town and joined the military because it offered him food, shelter, and purpose. He never expected to become a leader. But war has a way of making leaders out of ordinary people. Behind him crawled 37 Valari refugees. Most of them were younglings, children who had not yet fully formed their adult bodies. They looked like small clouds of light trapped in crystal shells. They could not speak standard language yet. They could only make soft chiming sounds of fear. With Junho were 11 soldiers. All that remained of his platoon of 40. The rest were dead, killed when their landing craft was shot down. They had come to rescue civilians. Instead, they had found themselves trapped behind enemy lines. "Keep moving," Junho whispered to his people. "Stay low. Stay quiet." Private Kwan Hannah moved beside him. She was 19 years old, the youngest in the platoon. She had joined the military to pay for university. She wanted to become a doctor someday. Right now, she carried 2 Valari younglings in her arms because they were too weak to move on their own. The younglings were cold against her chest. They weighed almost nothing, like carrying bowls of frozen light. But after hours of crawling and walking and hiding, they felt as heavy as mountains. "How much farther?" Hannah asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Ju Nacho checked his device. The extraction point was still 8 kilometers away. 8 kilometers through a city full of draken hunting parties. "Not far," he lied. "We are almost there." Behind them, something moved. Junho froze. He made a hand signal and everyone stopped. He slowly turned his head to look. A draken scout. It was moving through the ruins, searching for survivors. It had not seen them yet, but it would soon. These creatures could smell living things. It was only a matter of time. Junho looked at his people. 11 tired soldiers. 37 helpless Valari. If the scout raised an alarm, they were all dead. He made a decision. "Private Song," he whispered to the soldier nearest him. "Take everyone. Keep moving toward extraction. Do not stop for anything." Song's eyes went wide. "Sergeant, what are you?" "That is an order." Junho stood up before Song could argue. He raised his weapon and fired at the draken scout. The creature screamed, a horrible sound like metal being torn, and turned toward him. "Run!" Junho shouted. He did not look to see if they obeyed. He ran the other way, firing his weapon, making as much noise as possible. The draken scout chased him. More draken heard the noise and joined the hunt. Junho ran through the ruined streets, leading the monsters away from his people. His legs burned. His lungs screamed for air. He knew he could not escape. He was not trying to escape. He was trying to buy time. Behind him, Private Song grabbed Hannah's arm. "Move," Song said. "Move now. Don't let his sacrifice mean nothing." Hannah looked back once. She could see Junho running in the distance, a small human figure being chased by nightmares. Then she turned and started moving, the Valari younglings still cold against her chest. They walked. They crawled. They hid when enemies came close. Hour after hour, step after step, they moved towards safety. In space, Admiral Yunji watched 3 more of her ships die. The draken were breaking through. Some of their vessels were getting past the defensive line, heading toward the planet. "Magumwa will intercept," Yunji ordered. "Admiral, the ship cannot take much more damage." "I did not ask for your opinion." The Magumwa moved forward, placing itself directly in the path of the draken assault ships. It fired everything it had: missiles, beams, even small weapons that were meant for close defense. The draken fired back. The Magumwa shook. Hull breaches opened. Fires started in multiple sections. Crew members died at their stations. But the ship kept fighting. It kept blocking. It kept protecting. On his observation ship, Ambassador Thrall watched and could not understand. The humans were losing. This was obvious to anyone watching. They could not win this battle. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Every moment they stayed was a moment closer to death. But they would not leave. Why? Why would any creature choose death over survival? It made no sense. It went against every natural law that Thrall knew. And yet, here they were. Dying by the dozens. Dying by the hundreds. Dying for people who had never thanked them, never helped them, never shown them any kindness at all. Thrall watched a human ship explode. 300 crew members gone in an instant. And the next human ship simply moved forward to take its place. The ambassador began to feel something strange. Something uncomfortable. Something that felt like the beginning of fear. Not fear of the draken. Fear of something else. something Thrall could not yet name. Ambassador Thrall had decided to see the humans up close. From far away, they were strange. From up close, they might make more sense. That was what Thrall believed. Anyway, the ambassador transferred to the Maganhua just before midnight ship time. The great warship was badly damaged. Smoke filled the corridors. The lights flickered between bright and dark. Wounded humans lay on stretchers in every hallway, waiting for medical help that might never come. Thrall moved through the ship like a ghost made of crystal light. The humans barely noticed. They were too busy fighting, too busy trying to survive. Then the Draken came aboard. It happened at Corridor 7, deep in the middle of the ship. A Draken assault pod punched through the hull like a fist through paper. The metal screamed and tore. Air rushed out into space until emergency shields closed the breach. And from the pod came monsters. Draken boarding warriors were not like their ships. They were bigger, more terrible. Each one stood 3 meters tall, covered in black armor that seemed to grow from their flesh. They had too many arms, too many teeth, too many eyes. They smelled like rotting meat. 10 of them stepped into the corridor. Commander Yoon Siyuk was waiting for them. Siyuk was 40 years old. He had been a soldier his entire adult life. He had a wife and 2 sons back on Earth. He had promised them he would come home. Now, looking at these monsters, he knew that was a promise he could not keep, but he could make his death mean something. Fire! He shouted. His team of 15 soldiers opened up with everything they had. Bullets and energy beams filled the corridor. The noise was incredible. 3 Draken fell. 7 kept coming. The Draken were fast. Faster than anything that big should be. They crossed the distance in seconds, crashing into the human line like a wave hitting sand. The fighting became close and ugly. Siyuk saw his soldiers die one by one. Private Bang Ji-hoon, cut in half by a Draken blade. Corporal Wu Xiongmin, thrown against a wall so hard his body broke. Sergeant Lee Hyun-jae, dragged screaming into the darkness. Siyuk kept fighting. His rifle ran empty, and he dropped it. He pulled his pistol and fired until it clicked empty. He dropped that too and drew his knife. A Draken warrior stood before him. It was huge and horrible, covered in the blood of his friends. It looked at him with eyes that held no mercy, no understanding, no soul. Siyuk screamed. Not in fear, in rage, in defiance, in pure human stubbornness that refused to accept defeat, even when defeat was certain. He threw himself at the monster. Thrall watched from the shadows. The ambassador had seen many species fight before. Some fought with skill. Some fought with weapons. Some fought with numbers. Thrall had never seen anything fight like this. The human was small and soft and completely outmatched. He had no chance of winning. He must have known this. Any intelligent creature would have known this. And yet he attacked anyway. He stabbed with his knife, cutting deep into Draken flesh before the monster's claws tore through his chest. Siyuk fell. His body hit the deck with a sound that seemed too quiet for such a loss. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. For a moment, nothing moved. Then something impossible happened. Ensign Park Soo-jin had been hiding behind a support beam. She was 23 years old. She worked in the ship's communications department. She had never held a weapon in combat before today. She had been crying, shaking, terrified beyond words. She saw Commander Siyuk die, and something inside her changed. Soo-jin stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she made them move. She walked to where Siyuk lay and picked up his fallen knife. Blood covered her hands. She did not care. The Draken turned to look at her. This small, soft creature holding a tiny blade. It almost seemed confused. What was this thing doing? Soo-jin charged. She ran at the monster with no skill, no plan, nothing but pure, desperate courage. She screamed as she ran, a sound that was part terror and part fury and part something else that Thrall could not name. Behind her, others began to stand. Petty Officer No Hyungwoo picked up a fire extinguisher. It was heavy and metal, and it was all he had. He ran after Sujin. Crewman Im Yejin grabbed a length of broken pipe from the floor. She was 50 years old, a cook who had never seen combat. She charged with the others. More followed. Engineers and medics and cooks and cleaners. People who had no business fighting. People who should have hidden and hoped to survive. Instead, they rose and they ran and they threw themselves at monsters. Thrall watched a middle-aged cook swing a pipe at a creature 3 times her size. The Draken knocked her down easily. But another human was already there, picking up the pipe, swinging again. Then another. Then another. They were not winning. They were dying. One by one, the Draken cut them down. But for every human that fell, another took their place. They came from everywhere, an endless wave of soft bodies and determined spirits. And slowly, impossibly, the Draken began to fall back, not because they were losing, not because the humans were stronger, but because they did not understand. They could not understand. What kind of creature fights like this? What kind of creature dies like this? The Draken were used to prey that ran, prey that surrendered, prey that begged. These humans did none of those things. These humans looked death in the face and spat at it. It was wrong. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. The last 3 Draken retreated to their assault pod. They sealed the door behind them and detached from the ship. They flew back toward their own fleet, carrying with them stories that would spread through the Draken swarm, like a disease. Stories about creatures that would not stop fighting. Creatures that were not afraid to die. Creatures that were more terrible than the Draken themselves. In the ruined corridor, Ensign Park Sujin fell to her knees. She was covered in blood, most of it not her own. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. The knife fell from her fingers. Around her lay the bodies of the fallen. Commander Siyuk, the cook whose name she never learned. Dozens of others who had charged with her into impossible odds. They had won. If you could call it winning. Ambassador Thrall stepped out of the shadows. The ambassador's crystal body was dim, almost dark. In Valari terms, this meant overwhelming emotion, fear, awe, something beyond both. For the first time in 9,000 years, Thrall felt truly afraid, not of the Draken. The Draken were monsters, yes, but they were understandable monsters. They killed because they were hungry. They conquered because they were strong. This made sense. Humans did not make sense. Humans were weak and soft and short-lived. They should have run. They should have surrendered. They should have done anything except what they actually did. But they stood up. Again and again, they stood up. They fought not because they could win, but because they refused to lose. They died not for reward, but for principle. And that, Thrall realized, was the most terrifying thing in the universe. A species that does not fear death. A species that fights for ideas rather than survival. A species that will burn itself to ash rather than watch others suffer. Such a species could never be conquered. Such a species could never be controlled. Such a species was more dangerous than any monster the galaxy had ever seen. Thrall looked at the young ensign kneeling in the blood of her friends. She was crying now, soft sounds of grief and exhaustion. She looked so small, so fragile. So absolutely, utterly terrifying. The ambassador made a decision in that moment. A decision that would change Valari history forever. Humanity must never become their enemy, because Thrall had seen what humans did to their enemies, and it was the most frightening thing the ancient ambassador had ever witnessed. The battle ended at sunrise, not because the humans won, not because the Draken were destroyed. The battle ended because the Draken chose to leave. One by one, their ships stopped fighting. They turned away from Valari Prime. They opened holes in space and disappeared through them, fleeing into the darkness between stars. For a long moment, no one understood what was happening. The human crews stared at their screens in disbelief. The Valari survivors did not move, afraid that this was some kind of trick. But it was not a trick. The Draken were truly gone. 300 ships had come to feed on Valari Prime. 212 had escaped. The rest were wreckage, floating dead in the space around the planet they had failed to conquer. Of the 20 human ships that had come to fight, 7 remained. 7 broken, bleeding vessels filled with exhausted survivors. 16,000 humans had died in a single night, defending a world that was not their own, protecting people who had never asked for their help. On the surface of the planet, the sun rose over a changed world. Sergeant Junho sat against a broken wall, watching the light spread across the ruined city. He had survived. Against all odds, against all logic, he had survived. The Draken patrol that had chased him had been called back to their ships. He had hidden in a collapsed building for hours, waiting for death that never came. Now he was walking back toward the extraction point. Every step hurt. His body was covered in cuts and bruises. But he was alive. When he finally reached the meeting spot, he found Private Song waiting with the others. 11 soldiers. 37 Valari refugees. All of them alive. All of them safe. Private Quan Hana sat on the ground, the 2 Valari younglings still in her arms. She had carried them for 18 kilometers through enemy territory. Her arms were completely numb. Her back would hurt for months. Her feet were bleeding through her boots, but the younglings were alive. They clung to her uniform, making soft chiming sounds that might have been thanks. One of them, the smallest, looked up at Hana with eyes that held the light of distant stars. Why? The youngling asked in broken standard, words it had somehow learned during the long night. Why help? Hana looked at the small creature in her arms. It weighed almost nothing. It was made of crystal and light. It was completely alien to her, from a species that had never shown humanity any kindness, and yet she had carried it for 18 kilometers. She had risked her life 100 times over. She had nearly died protecting something she did not understand. Why? Hannah thought about the question for a long time. Finally, she smiled, a tired expression that still held warmth. Because that is what humans do, she said simply. The youngling did not understand. But someday, many years from now, it would remember this moment. It would remember the small human woman who carried it through fire and darkness. It would remember the smile, tired but true. And it would finally understand. In the great crystal chamber of the Valari High Council, Admiral Shin Yunji stood before the most powerful beings on the planet. She was still wearing her burned and bloodied uniform. She had not slept in 30 hours. She could barely stand, but she stood anyway. The council members were ancient creatures of pure light. They had lived for millions of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched countless species appear and disappear across the galaxy. They had never seen anything like humans. On behalf of the United Earth Fleet, Yunji said, her voice steady despite everything, I extend our hand in friendship to the Valari Collective. The chamber was silent for a long moment. The council members exchanged looks the humans could not read. Then the eldest among them descended from their platform. This was a being so old that even other Valari considered them ancient. Their light was almost too bright to look at. We have observed many species, the Ancient One said. We believed we understood the nature of living things. We believed all creatures act for themselves. The kindness is always a trait. That sacrifice is always a calculation. The being stopped before Yunji. Up close, the light was warm, almost like sunlight. We were wrong. You have shown us something we did not believe possible. You fought not because you had to. You died not because you hoped for reward. You came to save strangers who had given you nothing, and you asked for nothing in return. Ambassador Thrall stepped forward. The ambassador's crystal form was still dim with emotion. I came to observe humanity, Thrall said. I expected to find another young species to watch and record. Instead, I found something that terrifies me. The ambassador's light flickered. I found a species that looks at impossible situations and refuses to accept them. A species that faces certain death with anger instead of fear. A species that will destroy itself completely rather than allow others to suffer. Thrall turned to face the full council. The Valari must never become enemies of humanity, the ambassador declared. For I have seen what humans do to those who threaten what they love, and I do not ever want to see it directed at us. The council considered these words. Then, one by one, they nodded their agreement. Outside the chamber, the sun continued to rise. Its light fell on the ruins of the city, on the wreckage of ships, on the bodies of the fallen. It fell on human soldiers sharing food with Valari survivors. It fell on medics treating wounds without asking what species the patient was. It fell on a young private still holding two alien children she had carried through hell, that the Valari-human alliance was formally established that day. It would be the beginning of something larger. Something that would eventually include dozens of species across the galaxy. But that came later. On this day, there was only exhaustion and grief and the strange, fragile hope that comes after survival. On the Mugamua, Captain Park Do-hyun finally allowed himself to sit down. His ship was barely functional. Half his crew was dead. Everything heard. Lieutenant Kim Yuna brought him a cup of water. It was all they had left to drink. We survived, she said quietly. Do-hyun took the water and looked at it for a long moment. Many did not. No, Yuna agreed. Many did not. They sat together in silence, remembering those who were gone. There would be time for funerals later. Time for grief and tears and all the heavy ceremonies of loss. But for now, there was only this moment. Only the simple fact of still being alive. Outside the ship, the planet turned slowly beneath them. On its surface, millions of Valari were waking up to a new day. A day they would not have seen if not for strangers who came to help them. They would never forget this. None of them would ever forget. Years later, a memorial was built on Valari Prime. It was a simple stone pillar, placed in the center of the city that had been destroyed. On it were written 16,000 names, each one a human who had died defending a world that was not their own. Beneath the names was a single phrase, written in every language of the galaxy. They came when no one asked. They stayed when no one believed. They died so that others might live. This is what the galaxy learned about. Humanity. This is what they learned to fear. And this is what they learned to love. Not their strength. Not their weapons. Not their technology. But their hearts. Their stubborn, impossible, absolutely terrifying hearts. Hearts that would rather break than bend. Hearts that would rather burn than stand aside. Hearts that, in the end, were the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. This was humanity, and the universe would never be the same.